Hi, everybody. This is Louise Jackson. I'm with the Alumni Association of the University of Michigan. I'd like to warmly welcome all of you who are trickling into the session. I see those participant numbers are going up. So welcome, really warmly welcome you, our alumni, as well as students on the call to today's session. We're going to be talking about negotiation with Crystal Lee, who is the head of career advisors at Team Rora. So Crystal, such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Louise, for having me. Welcome, everybody. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me. And we have a lot to cover today. So just going to give it a couple more moments for more people to join in, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good. So without further ado, I'd like to quickly cover some housekeeping items just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of how to submit questions and things of the like. So some housekeeping, please make sure you get your questions into the Q&A feature. We're going to do the very best we can to make sure your questions get answered. Please, we do recognize, however, that there's a ton of questions. We already had a number of questions come in via registration. Each and every one of your cases is fairly unique. A lot of you have unique industries, jobs, personal situations. And so we do recognize that while we're able to cover the general principles of negotiation and questions and considerations you need to take into account, we are not able to provide that personalized, customized coaching to you individually. If you do need that service, we do encourage you to reach out to Crystal Lee at Rora. She's really able to help you. We also are going to be sharing a number of resources that will be helpful to you in that follow-up email. So again, we'll do the best to get to those questions. We may not be able to provide you with that unique customization that you may need for further help. So reach out to Rora for that. Before we dive in, I quickly want to share a little bit about Crystal and her work and her background. So Crystal Lee is the head of career agents at Rora, which is a company focused on improving job offer negotiations. So Rora provides support and guidance for candidates who could really use an agent in their corner while they're going through the potential of a very nerve-wracking moment in their lives, advocating for themselves to their employers. In the span of over just a year, Crystal has negotiated over 1,000 offers and supported over 100 plus clients and put millions back into the pockets of employees. Her background expertise as a VP of recruitment for tech, accounting, and real estate, as well as law, and as a tax manager for high net worth individuals, lends itself well to clients who are considering their offers from a more holistic view while also advocating for their worth. So Crystal, you really come with a wealth of expertise, and we're super excited to get this going today.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing introduction. Just to clarify for people, especially since we're the day after tax day, I did spend many years in that career. So I know that our company right now here at Rora, we do work a lot with tech individuals and tech industry, but I do have a lot of expertise in other industries as well. So for those of you who finish your tax day, congratulations. And also the whole high net worth thing is just a fancy way of saying I used to do taxes for rich people with rich people tax problems. That's a lot of what our clients are striving to be. Even some of you in this room are striving to be. So know that when I talk to clients or I look at offers and I consider what's going on with your situation, it's for us, it's not about just taking every dollar off the table, right? Like a lot of clients come to us that way, thinking that way, but it's more about what is actually going to be like that next best move for you. And that money off the table and making sure that you advocate for yourself is really the cherry on top. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and let's get this party started. All right. Okay, so we've got a lot of slides today. There will be parts in this presentation where we will take breaks to go ahead and address some of the questions pertaining to the areas that I had just discussed. So get your questions ready. Don't be shy to ask them. We will try to get to as many of them as we can, knowing that we probably won't get to everything, but it's not only here that you have the ability to ask those questions, okay? So don't feel like once you don't get a chance to ask here, don't feel like you're going to be missing out. All right, so that being said, All right, I think we're good. Everybody can see my slides, and I think everyone can see me. Yes, yes. All right, cool. And I already see a question in the chat room. Yes, I will be sharing these slides later, so don't you worry. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to go ahead and skip over the about me because Louise already did such a great job and we want to spend time elsewhere. Quick agenda overview. I'm going to talk about some things that are trending that we see on our end, as well as like tips for different levels of job seekers, as well as talking about changing some of those mindsets that really are kind of more so self-limiting beliefs that stop you and make you close the door on yourself. So we don't want you to close the door on yourself anymore, right? Like have someone else like close that door. You're gonna at the very least try, okay? So what's trending? These days, it's a great time to be seeking a new employer, right? Like there are a lot of employers trying to look for great talent out there, and they're finding it's kind of hard to not just find the great talent, but to retain great talent. So you all heard of the great resignation that's been happening. So what does this mean for employees? This means that we're seeing more employees stand their ground with their boundaries and actually respect their own personal boundaries. Like COVID has like taken a toll on like all of us, and all of us are kind of reacting differently, and it seems to make people more aware of their boundaries and what their needs are, and more willing to like put that out there and encourage their employers to respect those boundaries. So if it means that you got to go pick up your kid because of such and such, maybe they got sent home from school, like that's something that needs to be taken care of, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We definitely also want to let you know that the latest trend that we've been seeing is that although this screen right here is still happening, these type of interviews within this Zoom or virtual realm is still happening, there are more companies that are doing more on-site interviews, right? So they're inviting people back to check out the office, like walk the campus of that company. So be mindful that as much as you might want to rely on interviewing in this space right here in Zoom, that there are more in office, in person meetings starting to happen again. All right, so be aware of that. Some other trends that I want to point out to you that are on your side are pay transparency laws. These type of laws, they are the ones that are mandating employers to be more transparent about the salary that they are paying for that role, right? You know, oftentimes you go into a role, it seems really interesting, that job description is like practically looking like your resume. And the only difference is that instead of the employer name up top, you could easily just put your own name and that's what you do, right? But the thing that you're missing is like, how much are they willing to pay? And that is always like the pain point of starting that conversation of negotiations. So now you have actually laws that are on your side, depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. And what do I mean by jurisdiction? I do mean like the governing body that is in control of that law. So it might be a city, it might be a state, it might be like federal law. Here, most of the time, it's going to be either a city or a state that's governing this law. As you can see, New York City was one of the more recent ones that passed a pay transparency law, and that one is going to go into effect like mid-May. And there are other states and jurisdictions that are trending that way. So what you want to do on your end is to make sure that the employer that you're applying to, see if they fall under the jurisdiction for like this law, because that could really help you understand if you want to even apply for this job or not. And really understand what the employer is thinking about in terms of what they're willing to pay or what that budget is for this role. The irony of this law is that if you're an existing employee, a new employee coming in might actually know more about your salary and what your role should actually be paying than you do as an existing employee. So it's actually harder to ask like what that pay should be as an existing employee, because that law is not for you, that the law is for the new candidate. So think about that, right? Not exactly like an all-encompassing thing, but it's a step in the right trend. Now, just like with any law, and I've dealt with a lot of law reading, not that I'm an attorney, but as a former tax manager, I had to read a lot of tax law. So I know the pattern. With every law, there's a general rule, and then there's always exceptions to the rule. So the heads up I want to give you with these laws, especially the pay transparency law, is that there are loopholes, right? It is possible for this employer to give you a range for the salary instead of, and when I say range, I mean, it could even be a range of 2 levels, not just your level, but 2 levels, right? So that's something you want to be aware of. Like, so definitely don't just take the recruiter's word for it. Also do your research, have your back channel conversations as well. And when they are required to give you this information, changes from law to law, right? California Equal Pay Act, they are required to give you this information if you ask it after you've interviewed. But New York City, the law that they just passed, the employer is already required to disclose the salary right on the job description when they post it, right? So those are some nuances within every jurisdiction's law that you should be looking out for. The other law that's trending in your favor are the salary history bans, right? These are laws that make it so that an employer cannot ask for your past salary history. Now, why does this even matter? Why did this even come up? Well, this was the government's way of trying to help out with the pay disparity gap, right? Traditionally, the market data is historically repressed, as well as the underprivileged and that whole diversity and inclusion, like, you know, the minorities, they have been historically paid less, right? And so now, if they can just share what their market rate is, they can get caught up. And mind you, even though that law is in place now in most jurisdictions, I say most because I don't know that all jurisdictions have it, but most jurisdictions have a type of this law in place now. I do see that not enough people are aware of it. So where do they fub up? Like in they as in candidates, where there is this nervousness and an accident waiting to happen is the application process, right? I saw that this was one of the questions that was previously asked in the registration. When you apply for a job, like say for instance, you want to apply for a job, there's an online application and there's this box. There's this box that asks you for either your salary expectation or your past salary history, right? And employers actually can leave that box there. What they can't do is require you to answer your past salary history. But they will conveniently leave that box there for you to fill out. And like you as a candidate, if you didn't know that there were these laws in place, you might volunteer that information without realizing then that you actually just decrease your ability to maximize your negotiations or optimize your negotiations. So an example, all right, say for instance, you used to make $100,000 at your previous job, right? And it turns out your market value actually is $150,000. And you decide to answer that past salary history box, not realizing that you didn't actually have to answer it. You answered it just because you saw it on the form and you fill it in, not thinking about it. And then voila, you got an increase of $110,000 from the employer. You're happy, but you didn't actually realize that there was $40,000 more that you didn't capture because you went ahead and shared your past salary history. And they gave you an amount that they knew you'd be happy with, but they didn't actually give you the amount that their budget could go up to, right? So that's something that you want to be aware of. When you see those boxes on the applications, try not to answer it. Like, and if they do require you to answer that, like say for instance, they require you to answer the salary expectation box. Okay, yeah, you can share your salary expectation as a $0 or $1. They'll know that you're not expecting to only get paid $1 on your salary. So they'll have a follow-up conversation with you then. Okay. So why does this all even matter to you? Like, why am I bothering to share with you that there are laws trending your way? Well, it's time to even out the information asymmetry. So I don't know if you guys know this or you all know this, but employers, especially the larger companies, they have all these resources at their fingertips to put your offer together, right? So they have data systems, they have compensation analysts, they have recruiters, they have managers, hiring managers that are all working together to try to hire you and come up with an offer package for you. And with the tech companies that we see a lot, you want to think about it this way. There are employers out there that make their business and make money off of collecting your data and figuring out what to do with it, how to make money off of it, right? So if they're collecting all this information on you from like, what you're inputting in the ATS systems, like when you apply, then, and by the way, ATS system stands for applicant tracking system. So if you're inputting all this data for them into their data systems, they will know like how many times does someone have an offer from, let's say, Google versus Amazon? How many times, like 9 times out of 10, would they choose Google over Amazon? That kind of information, right? I'm just using Google and Amazon as an example, but you can apply this to other industries as well. These are the things that they have on their side, right? So with these trends and with these laws, it's to help you try to even out that information asymmetry and try to get more of the transparency on your side in your favor, right? What do you have on your end besides those new laws trending your way? So you have advisors, you have mentors, you have friends, you have parents, and for the most part, they do care about you and they have your best interests in mind. However, they might not necessarily be the same people that actually know about what's going on with your industry, your role. They might only know about the one company. I hear this a lot from the clients that we work with, that sometimes their advisors actually have relationships with these employers. And so there's a bias in that direction. They think that employer is a really great one, and that employer probably is. But it's not allowing for that advisor to be unbiased and consider the other options that student might have on the table. So once again, like, we do think that these are all great people that are really looking out for you, but they might not be the best position to give you the advice that you need to get you through that next hurdle. So go out there, get the help, right? Like, seek out, it doesn't even have to be our service, but seek out services that are there, that know how to negotiate in the realm that you are interested in trying to like improve your negotiation skills on. Okay. For the longest time, I've been sharing this lesson that I learned as a very, very early on professional. I as a very young accountant used to have my managers go like, "Hey, Crystal, ask questions, ask questions." And I would have asked questions, but I was so new to everything that I didn't even know what questions to ask, right? Like, how many of you are in that situation? So you only know what you know. And sometimes you don't necessarily even have the prerequisites to even know what to ask, right? So seek the help. Those of you who are still in academia, just remember that you've been conditioned to think that the offer is better than anything you're getting paid right now. And I just want to put this thought into everyone's head, not just those who are brand new students, like trying to graduate and go into the job market for the first time, but for everyone, that you can be grateful for the opportunity that an employer is offering you and still advocate for yourself and try to get up to your market rate. Because at the end of the day, negotiations, what they really are, is a chance for both sides to understand what each side can and cannot do. And then you can make an informed decision, right? So that's the mindset, one of the many mindsets to start off today. But that's one of the mindsets that I want you all to make sure to start taking away from today's presentation, right? Just because you have an offer on the table doesn't mean you can't be grateful and advocate for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause there. Louise, are there questions from the audience that like we can entertain at this point before I go into tips for different levels of job seekers?
Absolutely. So we have a couple of questions that I'm going to start. So the first question is, you talked a little bit about this, Crystal, but is there ever a benefit or advantage to providing a salary range or expectation in that application? And I know you've touched on this briefly.
Yeah. So like from the way we approach it, we do not like being the first ones to provide the salary information. And the reason being is that we find that oftentimes the judgment for either side doesn't really work in your favor. You could be giving a number that's just way too high, and then all of a sudden you have no chance at going into a company that you really were interested in, right? And then if you go in and say a number too low, then they're getting you at a bargain, and you don't want to work for an employer that's already undervaluing you and not paying you your market rate. So that's why we're like, you know what? First, go after trying to get an offer on the table first, right? Like before you end up like sharing a number. And the reason beyond the couple that I just shared is that you might go through this and find out there's more to the position that the job description covered, and all of a sudden like the amount that you shared as the correct compensation is no longer correct. It turns out the job was way more involved and you need to adjust that. Like I've seen that as a recruiter. I had a facility manager who was going to be like, the chief facility manager. And he was like, oh yeah, I'm seeking $100,000 for this job. And then when he went in for the interview and he found out all the things that the employer wanted him to do, he was like, oh, no. Like this is going to require this and this and this. So that's not going to be reflective of the salary that I just shared with you. So find out if you even have a match with the role first, right? And then try to have a conversation around salary.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And I think that's great advice. Really give yourself the space to make sure that there's that alignment before locking yourself in any kind of way. So we've had a number of questions all around similar points. I'm going to merge them all into one question, but they're all really centered on this issue of credible resources, whether it's Glassdoor, salary.com, websites, to be able to understand market worth and market value. So can you talk a little bit about that? And again, and maybe if it's addressed later on, that's also fine.
So yeah, I can mention some sites that like we definitely like taking a look at. Now here's the caveat that I will say. Don't rely on any one site, right? Like if you're putting all your cards in this one like site, that's not enough. For one thing, as a recruiter, I can easily deflect that data point that you grabbed, right? I can easily be like, I don't know the situation that allowed for that candidate to actually secure that offer. Maybe that candidate had skills that you didn't bring to the table. Maybe that candidate had counter offers that allowed for them to raise it up, but maybe you don't have that leverage card, right? So as a recruiter, I could easily just dismiss like those data points. So don't rely on those data points as your only leverage card, because it's not going to get you very far. that is something that I do cover later on. In terms of sites that we like using and looking at, in addition to our own data, because we're seeing live data all the time from our own clients, we see the offers that are coming in, and these are verified offers because we're seeing the offer letters, right? So when we provide you data, they are actual verified data points. So like there are services out there like ours that would probably have something like similar, but know that when you go and present data, you want to go and get more from more than one site. So I heard someone mention Glassdoor. We use also AI pay grades. We look at levels. We look at Team Blind, and really like we actually also use H1B. Like there's a H1B data site that we use as well, and those are all verified salary data points on that site. The only problem with that site is that it's just like full of ads, so it's really like incredibly annoying. And you also want to be mindful of data in terms of you might be collecting all this data, but do you even know what to do with it, right? So I just shared with you as a recruiter how I could already like counter your data point. That shouldn't stop you, but I can already deflect that. So don't just use that as your one leverage card. But say, for instance, if you use H1B, the H1B data site provides verified salary. It doesn't provide any of the other compensation points of an offer, right? And also, sometimes what employers do is that they will lower the amount of salary that they pay to someone who's needing assistance with getting like visa support because they need to offset the immigration expenses and resources spent on that particular candidate. So like we know that because we see that all the time, like, we know how to use that data site. So so when you use a site like that, like just know that, take it with a grain of salt. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's super helpful. And I think we do have a couple of other questions, but I think in the interest of time, maybe diving into the rest of our content, some of these questions may be covered in the content that you have prepped.
Yep. All right, hopping back in. Okay, so tips for different levels of job seekers. I heard that most of you today are not undergrad and masters, so I'm not going to really be spending that much time here, but I will leave these slides in for those of you who are in this realm. As the main thing I want you to take away from this slide that could be applied to all of you is don't forget this concept of ask anyway, right? Like there is a compounding effect when it comes to negotiating. So even if you get like an extra $1,000, right? That $1,000 on your base salary, that is something that can be not just increasing your base salary, but also when your base salary is increased, your bonus tends to be a percentage of that base salary. So therefore your bonus gets increased. And that also tends to be the benchmark for all these other compensation factors that come later. So once again, don't forget this concept of ask anyway, because it has a compounding effect. I also want to remind you that money is not the only thing you can negotiate. So keep in mind non-monetary requests. And internships, the main thing I want you to remember here is to network, network, network. Don't just go into an internship and like put your head down and do the work. You got to build the relationships. That's what's going to get you further in your negotiations than just doing good work. Okay. For all of the jobs, including if you're job seekers, your strongest leverage card is actually to be getting counter offers. But if you don't have them, don't worry, there is still ability to negotiate without having the strongest leverage card, which is a higher counter offer. Okay. Let's go right into optimizing negotiations for a new job versus like promotion and raises. Okay. I'm going to start with the new job seeker or returning to the workforce. So I heard some of you are thinking about returning to the workforce and you have concerns about like, hey, do I have like zero leverage here? And my answer is no, you don't have zero leverage. Just like with any applicant, the more you can demonstrate that your skills are still relevant and that they apply to the job that you're being required to do by that employer, then you still have space to like negotiate and whatnot. Um, and for those of you who have like a past salary history and you're finding that maybe it seems like you're getting penalized for not having worked for a bit, this is probably one of the few instances that you might want to consider sharing your past salary history, so that at the very least you're not starting off like less than what you were making before. Um, Now, your strongest leverage card is your existing employer for those of you who are seeking a new job but you're currently employed, or getting a counter offer. So if you're currently gainfully employed, your strongest leverage point is your current employer, because someone who is trying to recruit you right now needs to convince you to leave your existing employer, right? And so when you consider going for this new employer, I want you to make sure that you do the homework in getting ready to understand what it is that you're actually leaving behind. I just had a client like do this exercise of calculating what their actual offer is, right? So that means like, what are they making in salary? What are they getting in bonus and all those things? And that is just one consideration, right? That's also not including the things that they are leaving behind. Like maybe if they leave early, they're not going to be able to collect a bonus that they've earned. Maybe if they leave early, they're not collecting on like their 401k vesting that they have vested in for like 4 out of the 5 years that they needed to completely vest and take all of that with them. Maybe you actually just started and you've been at your job less than a year. And if you leave before then, there's a clause in your contract that says you have to pay back your sign-on bonus. That sign-on bonus needs to be actually paid like at the pre-tax amount. So there is a cost to working. There is a cost to leaving your existing employer to join a new employer. So please, please, please don't forget to calculate what those items are, because that new employer, as a part of your negotiations, can be asked to cover that sign-on bonus that you're having to pay back pre-tax. That new employer can be asked to like beat out what you're currently making in order for you to even be considering leaving your existing employer, right? Like you got to make sure that that new employer really is worth it. I was just mentioning earlier that I have a new client that I may go through this exercise, and that's when that client realized that like there was a $360,000 compensation package on the table that that client would be leaving behind. And that client also calculated that there would be $120,000 being left behind in bonuses that they would not collect if they went to this new employer. And the new offer that they got was equivalent, but the difference was that a lot of the package was in equity that was not readily able to be liquidated, right? So you have like close to $400,000 new offer, but half of it is in equity that you can't touch, right? So in order for this client of mine to leave, this client would actually have to take about close to $200,000 to actually leave and not collect from the new employer until 2 years later, right? So I'm just going to take a moment there to kind of recap that. I have a client who has to consider taking a $200,000 pay cut up front for an offer that seems to be equivalent, but it is not, because that new offer is not liquid. Her first existing employer is completely cash. Like that client will get that straight up, right? So in order to leave for this new employer, which the opportunity is wonderful, by the way, but it is something that is a major hit to take, it means that that client won't be able to save for a house, and that client won't be able to take care of their spouse with the extra money that they would have to actually leave off the table. So, as a new job seeker, and if you are currently employed, this is something that's very important, a very important exercise to do. Okay. Now, be careful to not talk yourself out of an opportunity before it is real. We talked a bit briefly about this earlier. And I heard this all the time as a recruiter, right? Like, oh, I don't want a commute problem. I don't want to work in that location. That's the most common example that I hear of. I don't want this commute problem. And what I say to them is, you don't have a commute problem because you don't even have an offer on the table, right? So once again, get the offer on the table first, and then when those problems actually become real, then that's when you could be like, okay, maybe I can negotiate this, because location is a very hot topic with negotiations these days, especially if you're working and negotiating against a larger company that has multiple offices and has the ability to provide remote services, right? Like remote work, right? Location is a heavy negotiation topic these days. So guess what? Once again, you don't have a location problem unless you actually have an offer on the table. So we have a saying as a recruiter, if there's a meeting to be had, take the meeting, meaning get in front of them, get the offer. And if that offer doesn't work out, and if it's a big enough company, guess what? That recruiter maybe actually has a better fit for you in another department, has a headcount for you somewhere else at a different location, right? So don't let that stop you. Find out that you actually want to do this job and work for this company first. And then if it doesn't end up being a match for this specific role, there are other opportunities where you can pivot within that, because now that employer has your interview feedback. They can see that you did really well in that, and they could use that and keep that sometimes even for a year, and you could activate it a year after, even if you walked away. So these are all things for you to consider. Okay. One more lesson in this realm that I want to share about new job seekers. I see this happen a lot where for some reason candidates start negotiating on the employer's behalf against themselves. And this is, and I shouldn't say for some reason, I know the reason is fear. So I'm going to remind you right now to not do this, right? So example, I'll suggest to a client, hey, like remind them that you have an employer that you need to actually be convinced to leave. And then a client would like, counter like, oh, but I've already like, they'll say this instead, or they'll say that instead against me. And it is your job to, yes, think ahead about what that employer might say to counter your argument, to defend your negotiation. But if you can already think that far ahead, take it one step further and go, well, how would you respond to that if the employer does go against what you just said, right? Like, so don't just stop at like what you think the employer might say to counter you. Think one more step ahead about how, if you are already anticipating that they're going to say that, take it one step further and get yourself back in a place where you can move forward and you can continue to defend your position. All right. So don't negotiate on behalf of the employer against yourself without taking it a step further and countering that counter argument. All right. Those of you who are considering promotions and raises, if you are a new job seeker who is trying to get an external promotion, you want to try to secure this before you get into the job, because once you get into the job, it's much harder. So those of you who are seasoned professionals, always, always, always have a conversation around leveling. Understand what your level's expectations are. Understand the goals of the leveling of the next level above you, right? Even if it's not for negotiation purposes, this is what you should be doing before you enter a job. You should know what's expected of you for this role, as well as what you're aiming for to get to that next offer, get to that next promotion, I should say. And that's just like, already you knowing about what you're about to get into. And for negotiation purposes, what you want to listen out for is that when these levels are being described to you, especially when it's the higher level, if you're hearing responsibilities that this higher level has that you already do, it gives you more of a ground to negotiate that next level up, or at least dip into that band, right? Some of you might be saying like, hey, I am someone who is like on the borderline of a senior, but I'm already doing things that are at the manager level, right? Like maybe you're a senior who oversees 2 people and a full-on manager oversees 5 people. Well, you're already heading in that direction. So maybe there is space there to start having you at the top of that like level of pay, maybe not necessarily all the way into the next level, but there's an argument there that you could say like, hey, I'm already starting to do these things in that next higher up level. So once again, as an experienced professional, always ask about what the expectations are for your level and ask for it for the next level above, just so you at the very least know what you should be aiming for when you get into that role. Along the lines, once again, of promotions and raises, once you're on the inside, your job is to make it as easy as possible for your manager or whoever it is that goes into that negotiation room to advocate on your behalf, right? So one of the best lessons I learned from a partner over at Witham, which is a CPA firm here in the Tri-City or the Tri-State area, she straight up said, guess what? We're not always thinking about you. So your higher ups are not always thinking about you and remembering all the achievements that you've made throughout the year. So your job is to remind them, right? And how would you do that? Keep a brag sheet. Keep a brag sheet throughout the year of the accomplishments that you've made and quantifiable metrics that support those accomplishments, right? So if you're someone who maybe gets paid $100,000 a year, but you brought in $1 million client, I would say that you have some wiggle room there to point that out and go, hey, I more than covered my own salary by bringing in this client. Probably should get a chunk of that as well, of that $1 million contract. So your job is to remind them, keep a brag sheet and keep it throughout the year. If you wait till it is time to actually reflect and fill in the form on your yearly evaluation or your semi-annual evaluation, it's too late. You got to do this throughout. This is that reminder that I'm going to give to you to invest in yourself, right? This is something you can be doing to invest in yourself. And this will take you far, especially in your negotiations. And I can still tell you that your strongest leverage card, despite all these bragging rights, is still to get an outside offer as a strong leverage card, right? You might be someone who is like, I deserve that promotion, I need that promotion, and every time you get passed over, right? Maybe HR is dragging their feet. I hear that a lot. HR is dragging their feet. And really the quickest way to get them to not drag their feet is to present a counter offer from an employer who's trying to poach you. So easier said than done, but really, once again, that is your strongest leverage card. All right, I'm going to take a pause there before I hop into these other slides. So Louise, questions from the audience that we can already address with this section that I just covered?
So we've had actually a number of questions, some of them a little bit related to what you've talked about. We had more questions around applications and questions related to when compensation is expected. Again, I'm not sure if you want to address those now, Crystal, or if you'd like to wait to address those later.
Like, I think we can just address them now because I'm almost feeling like I feel an anxious vibe from the crowd that if they don't hear this answer, they're like, no, that they won't be able to focus on the other advice. So
Yeah.
go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to try and sort of summarize a number of the questions that are all sort of related to this issue. So can we please talk more about addressing the compensation expectation question? I seem to encounter it a lot. I've also heard that this question can be used to weed out applicants to see if they've done their research on their average salary. Is it really true you're going to be weeded out if you put in 0 or 1? So we have a couple of questions that are similar to that specifically.
Yeah, so honestly, like they could use all sorts of things to weed you out. Like that's why this question is a lose-lose, right? Like you put in a 0, 1, they could weed you out. You put in a number too high, they could weed you out. You put in a number too low, they could weed you out, right? So so like just get over the fear and put in what's gonna work best for you. And when it comes to them actually having conversation, your best bet is to actually apply through an internal referral, right? Like, so if you're able to apply to an internal referral, there are several companies out there that have a policy that an actual human being has to get back to you by a certain number of days if someone internally referred you, right? So you have a better chance of quote unquote getting away with putting a 0, 1 or delaying this salary conversation to later if you go through an internal referral. So once again, don't just use like one avenue to maximize your negotiations. You got to use a combination, right? And that being said, if you get to the point where there's a pre-screen with the recruiter and they're asking what your salary expectations are, if they're asking you, like, I'm going to remind you that all these questions that a recruiter has that they find important, there's an employee candidate equivalent that you can equally ask back. So if they're asking you for your salary expectation, you rightfully so can ask them, well, what's the pay scale for this, right? It would really help me out because like you as the employer, you have a lot of the data, you know more of the market data than I do at this point. And like I'm still trying to figure out the role and really all that is a part of the role. So it would really help me out if you actually shared with me what the pay scale for the role is. And once again, that's why those laws that I shared at the beginning of the presentation are going to be more for beneficial to you because if that employer falls under that jurisdiction, they have to give that information to you. Okay, so go ahead, Louise.
Thank you so much. No, that's helpful. So just to clarify, it does seem like you're saying, because we talked a little bit about if it's possible to not have to be the first, right? Whether it's in an application or a conversation to actually have that statement. But if it is required through the ATS system, there is some concern. We got another question about this, and you're saying, to your point, if you put 0, if you put 100,000, whatever you put, are you going to be weeded out? That's an impossible question to answer because you don't know, again, if the recruiter will weed you out, whatever you put in there. So, I suppose what you're saying then, Crystal, is it's an individual use case with each person, deciding whether to put the 0 or to put, a number in there that they assume is not a high ball or a low ball.
Yeah, like that is our first recommendation. Like if you were to cave, we do recommend caving high rather than caving low.
Okay.
And like if you cave low, it's even more of a lose-lose, right? Like you get lowballed and like you're not you're lowballing yourself and the employer. If they're willing to hire you, then I would question the integrity of that employer, as well as there is this chance that the employer would then be like, well, what's going on with the confidence of this candidate that they are pricing themselves so far below the market.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So those are all things to consider. And that's why like that I recommend that you do what's best for you, right? Like you do, if you're gonna cave high, our first recommendation is to put in that 0 or that 1, especially if you're going through an internal referral, like because you're pretty much guaranteed to be able to speak to someone on the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So internal referral, put that 0. If you don't have that referral and you have to put a number, then cave high. So thank you so much. That's really great. And for those of you on the line who want to do some more work on internal referrals and the job search, please look out for a partnership that we're going to be hosting on the 2-hour job search with Steve Dalton, who specifically does work on the job search and how to get that internal referral. So I'm going to keep going, Crystal, and hand it back over to you.
Great. All right. So mindsets, we already talked about ask anyway. So the reminder that I will share here is, as long as what you're requesting is reasonable and that you ask respectfully and professionally, the worst they say is no. And in negotiations, like we hear this saying of like, like you're not really negotiating until you hear a no. And what do we think about when we hear that no? Well, like we're negotiating, and it's actually a success when we hear a no, because at the very least, you didn't say the no to yourself first. Okay, now there is this idea of, well, what if I put down this request and then they take the offer off the table, right? First of all, the rescinds of an offer happen very rarely. Like I've negotiated thousands of offers and I've maybe seen 10 rescinds at this point. So we always talk to our clients about this mindset, right? Going, if this employer punished you for advocating for yourself just the first time, then is that an employer that you really want to work for in the first place, right? Because if they're this tough on you right at the beginning, what chance do you have once you get on the inside? Like what chance do you have of a promotion, like a raise? What's it going to look like when you try to advocate for yourself again? So these are the things that we want you to think about if you're already facing an employer who is threatening to take an offer off the table just from you asking once to advocate for yourself. This also goes in the line of starting to weed out those more predatory employers, right? Like you want to feel supported from the beginning. And maybe they can't do that on money, but at the very least, they shouldn't take the offer off the table for you if you just ask once. And we also want to give you some ideas as to what are some of the asks that are maybe outside of the box. Now, mind you, none of these are hills worth dying on, but these are areas that we've seen recently come up that aren't necessarily straight up like, I want more cash, I want more equity type of requests. So optimizing your start date is one. So I'm going to use Twitter because it's a very current story these days. And Twitter is going through Elon Musk, like, putting that bid to do a hostile takeover, right? And, we do have clients that were trying to go start at Twitter, like even this month. And Twitter does have this policy of, we're going to base your equity package on the month that you are starting, and take that average. Now, you can imagine that when everybody heard about Elon Musk and the Twitter stock went high, that for someone who's about to start, it's very possible that now their stock value is inflated, maybe even artificially. So this is something that you should be aware of, like consider when your equity start date will be. And then that might be you having to look out for, okay, it might be more advantageous if I just delayed my start date. So that's something to think about. It is a more advanced request, but there are other reasons also why people negotiate their start date. But I also want to remind you that a start date is a non-monetary request that you can make that is negotiating. Now, I did also get a question about inflation and what's being done with it these days. I have seen clients like try to negotiate their offer and defend their requests using inflation. Is not a hill that you want to that's worth dying on, but it is something worth considering because we do see some pretty high inflation rates these days. I put that in the same category of also considering your location when it comes to like taxes and cost of living. So these are all things that you can use as like leverage cards in making your requests, but they're not necessarily hills to die on. So these are all just reminders for you. Some other things that are also outside the box, requesting for a flex schedule with working from home, hybrid work from home office model, or working remotely. The portion of remote that we see negotiated a lot these days is to not be adjusted for the region that you're living in. So say for instance, you are based in the Bay Area, now you live in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is maybe considered a tier 2 location for your company. And so they would adjust your compensation package maybe down by 10%, but you're still doing the same work as you were in the Bay Area and you're still working for the same team. You are just physically located in Austin, Texas at this point. So we are finding more clients to be like, no, we don't feel like this is right. Like I do have the ability to do the exact same work, just located somewhere else. So I shouldn't be paid less for that. So that's something that we've been seeing a lot lately. There are uh, there are candidates who are negotiating a 4-day work week as well as 80% work-life balance, as well as negotiating their non-compete clauses in their contracts. So these are all things that you all can now consider because you heard them here. I put in the grandparent leave because I thought it was like super cute. It wasn't something that somebody negotiated, just having to be an employer included that. I just thought it was really silly. But it is a thing. And grandparents, like I have coworkers who are grandparents in their 40s. So it is a thing. So maternity leave, paternity leave, and now grandparent leave. All right. So a second belief to bust. I need market value data to negotiate. We mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to go through it quickly. That is one of your leverage cards, but remember, it's just one leverage card. So make sure to actually consider what else you have in hand. So I'm going to give you an example of how there was a negotiation even without data points. A client of mine had a deadline issue. This client had a lot of fear. Sally, economics PhD, had an assistant professor offer $100,000 for the year for a very well-known university. This was actually a pretty great offer. Like Sally really, really wanted to work for this university, but she also knew that she had other offers in the pipeline that she has not heard the result from. And there was a really quick turnaround on this offer. So I said to Sally, all you have to do, Sally, is to get this deadline extended. Just ask for a week. Just ask for a week, give your other offers a chance to come in. And there was a lot of fear asking for a week. She's like, no, 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 I can't do that. I can't do that. The employer already said that they needed this deadline was a pretty hard deadline. And I said, Sally, don't close the door on yourself. Ask for a week. We compromised and I helped her ask for 3 days, 3 extra days. She got over that fear, asked for 3 extra days. In those 3 days, she actually got an offer that was over $300,000 in the offer for to be a full-time consultant for a consulting firm, right? And if she didn't ask for these 3 days, if she didn't get out of her own way to ask for these 3 days, she would have missed out on $220,000 that she could have just gotten for herself if she would have just heard the results. And she is the type of person that would have just accepted the offer and declined everything else because she did not want to ever go in this territory of accept and renege, which we don't recommend for anybody unless there are some really, really strong circumstances around it. Like if your offer is 300, like, 3 times the offer that you had accepted. But like there is very, very strong policies around this at Michigan University, right? University of Michigan, that like you definitely don't want to actually like accept and renege an offer. If you find yourself in that situation, please, please, please go talk to your career counselors, like because this, even in our line of work, we've rarely seen this happen. I've seen it maybe happen 3 times. So we don't recommend that you do this if you ever find yourself in this position. Sally stopped herself from even entering this position because she knew that if she didn't get these 3 extra days, she would have just accepted this offer and then let everything else go. So going back to the deadline, this is an example of it had nothing to do with data. It had everything to do with just getting over your own fear and allowing for the request to be made and seeing that it's okay to not shut the door on yourself, right? So Sally, she got an offer, $306,000. She didn't accept it right away just because she was needing that time to digest that offer, which the employer actually added an additional $10,000 to that. And so she signed. And so because she asked for 3 extra days, she was able to increase and wait for an offer that was her market value, that was at $320,000 instead of accepting an academic offer that was $100,000. All right. In that example, very much so an example of data didn't even come into play here. It was just a matter of getting over your own fear and getting out of your own way. And if you need to get an idea of how to write a deadline extension, there is a template here already. All right, so that second belief of you need market value data to negotiate, not true. All right, third belief, I can't negotiate anymore because the recruiter has said no. Don't let the recruiter block you. If you went through negotiations and the only person that you negotiated against is your recruiter, then you probably didn't actually use all the allies and all the resources that you had in hand. So the recruiter's job is to get you in as cheaply and as quickly as possible. But the manager's job is to get you in so that you are the talent that serves the company's objectives. And these two ideas don't always align. So when you actually talk to the recruiter and you get blocked, reach out and get some help. Get some help from your hiring manager. Get some help from the teammate and see if they can actually like put in a good word for you. There's an example here of down leveling. I'm not going to spend too much time in it because I want to be able to get to the fourth and the fifth. And okay, so the fourth belief to bust is I'm being greedy by negotiating. I heard that it's very important for you all to understand the whole thing around diversity and what's going on these days. So this is the latest graphic from Power Her New York. They are the organization that helped write the transparency law here in New York City. And this is a graphic that tells us like how the women in New York are not getting paid up to par just yet. And the most like heartbreaking fact that they shared with me is that the Latina, Native American, and Black American demographic is going to actually take at least 100 years to catch up to the white male counterpart dollar. And this is the reason why I joined Rora. Like I joined because I wanted to help and try to correct this gap, like one client at a time. So when we talk about our fears around looking greedy or damaging relationships, you have to be able to put the mask on yourself first, right? I see this time and time again where like the minority groups don't ask for what it is that they deserve because there's a lot of fear, and they would put the needs of the employer ahead of their own first and not take care of themselves. That's actually what Sally did when she was fearful of negotiating and asking for 3 extra days. She put all the needs of the employer ahead of her own. And I'm so glad that like we had a chance to correct that mindset because there was an opportunity for her to take care of her needs as well as another employer's, right? So close the gap, whatever you guys can do to help close the gap. Like this is a really big problem out there, and I'm trying to solve it one client at a time. Um, and I know we're running close up on time. I do have a few more moments that I can share. So, Louise, let me know if I need to like have a hard cutoff. But candidates have fear. And for some of you, it's not about taking every single dollar off the table, right? For some of you, it might just be not being so scared to just ask for a deadline extension so that you have the other offers in hand so you can make a decision, right? We're not all starting off in the same level of comfort in terms of negotiations. So it's okay that if our achievement this time around was just to ask for a deadline extension, if our achievement this time around was to just ask for an extra $10,000, right? Just keep that momentum up and keep learning every time you negotiate. Um, Now, talking about hurting relationships and fears, like the counter to having that fear is to remind yourself that the employer should be demonstrating to you at this point how much they can support you, even at the beginning. As I mentioned earlier, they need to actually make it so that you feel supported, so that you have an idea of how they would support you once you get on the inside. And the hiring managers are expecting you to negotiate. Um, and they even sometimes see it as a red flag if you don't, because they would start thinking, okay, what's going on with this candidate's confidence that they don't have the ability to speak up for themselves, right? And it's normal for you to feel awkward about bringing it up and talking about money, but just know on their end they're used to it, right? So they're expecting, so don't be shy, bring it up, and at least try to advocate for yourself. We've all heard the guilt trips. We have to think about internal equity with the team. Oh, if you negotiate this, you're not passionate about the mission. If you negotiate compensation, you should come in with the right level of expectations at the right level of compensation. Otherwise, we're not setting you up for success, or we'll take care of you once you've come in and proved yourself, right? And I can definitely tell you that I've heard horror stories for each one of these quotes where once being on the inside, the candidates were not taken care of, right? So what you need to do is just find out what the terms are for each employer so that you can make the best decision for yourself, right? Give the employer a chance to demonstrate how they can support you now. One of the questions that we got from registration was, how can I weed out the predatory employers? This is how you do it. See if you have that connection with them, with the hiring manager, and if they can advocate for you, right? Questions that you want to ask, like yourself, like how transparent are they? Do they give you all the details of your offer, or do they say something like, we can't share that part's confidential? Will they let you have additional meetings with your hiring manager, your team members, or your skip manager? If you have concerns over how they treat diversity and inclusion groups, can you meet someone in that demographic who have your position, right? If you're not able to meet someone in that demographic who holds your position, probably a good sign that they don't have diversity as much as you would like, if that's an important factor for you. And then, how much are they making you feel guilty and greedy, right? If you're made to feel like that you're being incredibly guilty and greedy, and you have the evidence to support that you're not crazy in making this request, then that is a red flag for the employer. All right, so the fourth belief is now busted. You're not greedy by negotiating. You're just trying to understand what can and cannot be offered so that you can make an informed decision. And last but not least, offer reasons. Can you lose an offer negotiating? The answer is yes, you can. It happens very rarely. Once again, I've negotiated thousands of offers and I've maybe seen 10 rescinds, and they all had some sort of sign before it happened. The typical signs that I see, very little support from the hiring manager. They say something along the lines of there's a close second candidate. So those tend to be very big clues that an offer rescind is coming down the pipeline. So that's your indicator to negotiate less aggressively and possibly even consider not negotiating. But once again, we always say ask anyways, right? So if you're going to ask anyways, think twice about it if this is the only offer that you have in hand. Have the safety of another offer if you're thinking about negotiating and you already got these signs. All right, so how to de-risk losing an offer from negotiating? Understand your leverage before you negotiate. Are there other candidates? Like, what is the head count for this year? Like, how do you compare to those other candidates? How much buy-in do you have from these teammates, manager, senior leaders? All those suggestions that I made earlier about having these conversations with your teammates and your hiring manager, your skip manager, well, that's how you find out your leverage. All right. So the fifth belief of you will lose your offer, the more positive way of thinking about it is that it's rare. It does happen, but it is very rare. And that pretty much brings me to the end of the slides, and we can now just open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And I know for those of you, we are at 1:11. So if you do need to go, we recognize we're well over an hour. But we're going to try, Crystal, if it's okay with you, to cover some of the questions that we received. Does that still work for you? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the questions that we have here in the Q&A. So employers ask for W-2s. While this includes all combined compensation, this allows employees the advantage of compensation negotiation. What is best as a job seeker strategy to prepare for this?
I definitely would recommend that you see if the law that I mentioned earlier applies to you, because that is sharing past salary history. And I have to really understand why you're being asked for that W-2 in the first place. Like, why are you having to verify your past salary history? Like, employers can do other things to verify employment that doesn't involve the W-2. So I'm not quite understanding why you're having to share your W-2 or why that employer is asking for it. It doesn't make me feel good about it. So I need to understand the terms of that more before I proceed with any more recommendations on that. Yeah.
Thank you. So do you have any advice for those of our alumni who are in startup negotiation, including 409A? And my apologies, I'm very ignorant about this space. So this is one that I have to hand off completely to you, Crystal.
Yeah, so we see this all the time, right? Like, what you want to do with 409A is really just get the terms, the dollar amount around it, right? Like, what is the most recent valuation for 409A? Now, the relevance of this changes in terms of negotiations depending on the series of startup that is in. It's more important, like if it's a smaller, earlier on startup, like Series A, Series B, maybe even Series C. But when it comes to 409A valuation, I don't pay as much mind to it except to see if they share it with you, because I'm testing transparency as opposed to really focusing in on that dollar amount. The only time that I focus more so in on the dollar amount is when it's an earlier stage startup.
Thank you so much. So we got a couple of questions around if you have an existing employer, you're gainfully employed, and I know you discussed this, how do you maintain a good relationship with your existing employer, your current employer, if you're using a new job offer to leverage with the hope of staying within your existing employment situation without risking or jeopardizing your relationship with your existing employer?
Yeah, I would share with you that there is risk, right? Like there is risk of exposure in terms of when you do share this, like then the employer does know that, hey, this person is thinking about leaving, right? Now, where you can minimize that risk is your relationship with your manager, your supervisor, right? If this supervisor, you know, already went in and did the work with HR to try to get you that promotion, try to get you that raise, and you're not seeing it happening, well, I would then say it's business, it's not personal, right? Like you already tried to give them the benefit of the doubt to actually make this change on your behalf, and you've proven that you should already be getting it. So when you get to the point where you're presenting an outside employer's offer, you have to be in a place where you are ready to leave if you need to, like, like use that card, right? And it's not because you want to, but it's because that opportunity is better and they are offering you something that is more worth leaving. And mind you, maintaining that relationship once again is dependent on how how much your relationship is good already with the hiring with the manager that you have. And we do see a lot of boomerang, what we call boomerang candidates, where they leave and then they go to somewhere else for a year and then they come back, right? So that is happening these days. So like know that it is happening a lot. So don't be afraid of it. But one thing for sure, you don't want to just be like, bye, like, see ya, never talk to you again. You want to actually like maintain that relationship, have conversations, take that manager afterwards out for lunch or something like that. Yeah.
That's right. So, even though you are engaging in these conversations, in all respects, you're still maintaining that relationship with the existing employer.
Yeah.
But you are in a place where you may be ready to walk away if you need to, by having this other offer. Agreed.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. So let's dive into one more of our question. Can you please comment on the habit of employers who ghost candidates and do not respond to their queries during the interview process? And how does this factor in here?
Yeah, so this happens a lot. Like as much as we tell candidates, hey, give that respect, don't ghost people, right? The thing is that you're just one of probably many candidates that they're having to focus on, or not focus on, for that matter. And really, it's not personal. It's probably because they're focusing on trying to close someone else. We have seen multiple times where a candidate would, and we would even encourage that they reach back out going, hey, I'm at offer stage with your competitor and I really want to be considered here. So like either we consider and interview me now or you forever hold your peace. And that tends to actually generate a response from the recruiter. So like those who ghost you, don't take it personally, but if that's someplace that you really want to work at, definitely, if you're getting close to an offer with a competitor, use that to your advantage.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to dive into the next one. Our alumni state you received an offer from company A. You accepted company A. You accepted. A month later, you received an offer from company B. Okay, so this may be a reneged question. Huge benefits at company B. Fantastic offer. Can you still accept company B and start at a later date and just start company A and then give your notice after you've just started? This is quite something. I'll let you take this. I do have thoughts myself on this one.
Okay, wow. That is a very sticky situation. Okay, so I will give you a heads up as to what to look out for. I do not recommend this for the faint of heart. You should be seeking help in terms of getting like either the career center or like asking Louise's help, asking for my help. You should get somebody's like coaching, like career coaching help, because this is not an easy situation to navigate. Have I seen people do this? Yes. I don't recommend it because, for one thing, You should always be aware of your non-compete and non-moonlighting clauses in your employment contract, right? Because you might actually be violating terms of your employment contract should you take on a second job. And if those are not a part of your contract, you really have to consider the damaging relationship aspect, right? An employer does spend a lot of resources to try to hire you, which is why if you get a better offer that is really extremely better, like we call it a Godfather offer, like it's just an offer you can't refuse, right? If you're in that situation, then you really have to think about how you're going to unwind from that, like unwind from that first employer and go, is that a place that I really cannot see myself in ever again? Right? Because once you go away, even though we hear that there's not necessarily bad remarks put on file for you per se, but it is a very, very tricky situation. And I would also have to consider the terms in which you accepted that first offer in the first place, right? Like if this was a recruiter that was extremely aggressive and that bullied you with a deadline, gave you a lowball offer and all these things that I just warned you to look out for, right? Then I would have once again a conversation with a career coach, a career counselor going, this was a situation. I felt like I was forced into taking this offer before I was ready. And this is what this new employer is offering me. And when I've seen clients actually consider accepting a new offer, it was because of the fact that they felt very mistreated by the first employer. They felt that they were pressured, but that was the only option they had on the table. And they just felt like they were stuck in a hard place. The other added component is that they just felt like this new offer was in line with their research, their previous experience, and it was more so what they wanted to do. And so then in that respect, we had to really consider everything in that whole picture before even approaching that situation.
Thank you.
Louise.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And I couldn't agree more to the point you've made of the 1,000 offers that you've negotiated. This has only happened in 1 or 2 instances. So we do not recommend it. If you're a student on today's call, you must reach out to your career services officer. They have very strict protocol and policies around reneging, especially if it is a formal partner with the University of Michigan career offices and that employer has a partnership with us at the university. Please reach out to your office if you do find yourself in this situation. We by no means encourage it or recommend it. First port of call is before you make that acceptance, make sure you've done that homework. You've asked for that extension as much as possible so that you do not find yourself in this situation. Try and avoid it at all costs. If you really do find yourself in this situation, please do reach out to us. We would like to walk you through careful consideration around the implications this has for you long-term as well as immediate. So I'll just leave it at that in terms of that question. But we are at 1:23, so we've gone well over. We do have a number of other questions. I would encourage you to look out for the email from us at the Alumni Career Program. We will be sharing Crystal Lee, her information, the information about Rora as well for you to follow up if you need to. We would encourage you to reach out to Crystal. She's a phenomenal resource and really an exceptional specialist and expert in this space. Crystal, I don't want to keep you longer. I know we've gone nearly an hour and a half into the next portion of our hour. So just thank you so much for your time, for giving back to the University of Michigan and for all your expertise. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me today, everyone. Feel free to reach out. We will be sharing the slides and I pass that information on to Louise to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And if we didn't get to your question, our apologies. We know we did go well over. We really appreciate you joining us. And we do hope that you learned a lot from us during the session. Thanks so much, Crystal, and go blue, everybody.
Go blue. Bye.
Bye-bye.